this. I'm Jay Willis. This afternoon, we're returning to our series, Our Future on the Ballot, talking to candidates from across the country about what they stand for, what they don't, and what they hope to do if elected this fall. And my guest today is Chrysta Castañeda, an engineer, attorney, and the Democratic nominee running for Texas Railroad Commission. Now you might think, Texas Railroad Commission, not a big trains person, doesn't matter to me. But despite its name, the Texas Railroads Commission doesn't regulate railroads, probably something they should address. Instead, it regulates the state's gigantic fossil fuels industry. So in an election where the threat of climate change looms large, sort of an evergreen topic these days, having one of the board's 3 members pledging to follow the science on climate change in Texas, the nation's largest oil producer by a wide margin, would be arguably pretty significant. So the last time a Democrat won election to the Railroad Commission was in 1990. But this year, things might be different. The well-funded incumbent who enjoyed the support of the state's considerably sized Republican establishment nonetheless lost the primary in an upset to Jim Wright, a relatively unknown outsider. So again, we're joined by Chrysta today to talk about the economic and environmental issues at play in this race. Chrysta, again, thanks so much for joining me. Many people in Texas and outside of Texas, including me, had no idea that the Railroad Commission is actually the oil, gas, and regulatory board in the state. What powers does the commission have that you want to see used differently if you were elected?
Sure, great question, and I'm happy to be with you here today. Yes, it has enormous powers over oil and gas production in the state of Texas. And what I talk about all day, every day, is how important this race is for the climate and for the environment. In fact, it's been written up as the most consequential climate election in the nation because of the impact of oil and gas extraction on greenhouse gases, and because no place is it bigger than right here in Texas, as you just observed. I run on simply following the law that has been on the books for 100 years. Can you believe that 100 years ago, Texans knew that what we needed to do was conserve and preserve our natural resources, including oil and gas, and not allow them to go to waste? And as a result of that, we have laws that prevent flaring, which is lighting on fire of natural gas in enough quantities in 2019 that it would power the city of Houston continuously, and venting, which is intentionally releasing that gas into the environment. And the greatest component of it is methane, which is 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. So if we would simply enforce the laws, we would have a tremendous impact on climate and environmental issues.
So critics of the Railroad Commission call it a captured agency. They say that the oil and gas industry, for the most part, ensures that the commissioners are beholden to its interests. What about your relationship to the industry is different than previous candidates for commissioner?
Well, a lot. Okay, so even though I'm a Democrat, I have worked in and around the industry for over 35 years, both as an engineer and an attorney. And I have worked all sides of legal problems in the industry in particular. I've represented operators, I've been the general counsel of an oil company, but I've also represented the people that have sued them, and I had to have received, as a plaintiff, one of the largest verdicts against an oil company in history. It was recognized in 2016 as one of the largest verdicts in the nation. So I know a lot about this business. I know a lot about it because I spend all day, every day studying the problems that the industry faces and the industry creates. It's not an easy fix. Let's not fool ourselves. What ails us in terms of climate and greenhouse gases and environmental issues is a complex issue to fix, but we can fix it if we focus on enforcing the laws.
So your opponent, Jim Wright, has himself been fined by the Railroad Commission for more than 200 environmental violations at his oil business. I'm not a big industry person, but that seems to me like a lot. But you would know better than I do. Is that typical for people in the oil business, or is that something that voters should look at and think, I don't know?
Well, it's exceptional. it's exceptional that not only was he cited, I think we're now up to 258 times for environmental violations by the Railroad Commission. He was ordered to cease and desist his oil field sludge recycling business by the Railroad Commission, and that enforcement action is still ongoing. He's been to his business partners for fraud, and he was ordered to pay over $108,000 in fines. That is remarkable. It's hard to get the Railroad Commission to issue that much in fines. And so it really shows a history of really wanton disregard of Railroad Commission rules. And if you can't follow the Railroad Commission laws, you ought not be the Railroad Commissioner.
What are some of the effects that we're seeing from the lack of environmental regulation in Texas? How are people and communities being affected by some of the issues, the problems that you want to fix?
Great question. So when we talk about flaring, and I invite anybody who wants to check it out on Google Earth, you can see that the West Texas, which used to be one of the darkest skies in the nation, in eastern New Mexico, are lit up like the eastern seaboard with these flares. That's how much is going on. We know that women who live in proximity to these flares are 50% more likely to give birth to premature infants. We know that people who live in proximity to these flares are more likely to have lung disease because of the volatile organic compounds that are released. And even worse, if it's just vented gas and it's not actually burned up, that releases benzenes and other carcinogens. So there's a lot of impacts to the people who live nearby. So much so that when I began this campaign, I actually marched right into the middle of the Midland Petroleum Club. Now, this is the heart of the good old boys oil industry. And I had my badge on and said, I'm Chrysta Castañeda, I'm a Democrat, and I'm running for Railroad Commission. And do you know what they wanted to talk to me about? These good old boy, mostly Republican oilmen. Well, miss, what are you going to do about all this flaring? They know it's a terrible problem. They know it's an existential threat to the industry, and the Republicans are not going to do anything for them. They will continue to allow oil companies to violate the laws and grant the exception permits to allow them to disrespect that law. And it's just not going to get any better.
So you've talked a little bit about the problem of flaring and a couple other things that you'd like to see the commission do more of. Whose fault is this? Is the commission at fault? Has it not done its job enough? Well, what should voters look at and think that's the problem that needs to be solved?
Well, I do run against the Railroad Commission itself because I do feel like that having been in the hands of Republicans for the last 25 years exclusively, they've simply just let go the environmental protections that underlie our whole system of laws here in Texas. So I do pin this on their failure to enforce the law. And look, it's a complicated business. There's no doubt that it's complicated. But we could have done much better than we are doing on this issue of flaring and venting. About half the industry knows that they can produce oil without doing all of the flaring and venting, and they don't do it. And they know how to re-inject those carbon gases back into formation, or they know how to make sure that they have adequate pipeline capacity to take it away and sell it for productive purposes rather than simply light it on fire. It's been the allowing of development of wells without adequate disposal of this gas that has been the problem. And frankly, that's the Railroad Commission's, so they're failing.
So I was going to ask you this question halfway in jest, but then I found out that it's actually a page on your campaign website. What's a better name for the Railroad Commission? What should it be called instead?
Oh, I love this question. So just a point of history, this agency is 120 years old or more, and its first job was to make sure that there was adequate capacity and fair treatment on railroads for farmers who were shipping the grain. So it used to be named correctly, but in 2005, it stopped having anything to do with railroads. Look, we need to figure out what we're doing with energy across the board here in Texas. The legislature needs to decide, are we going to have an agency that not only oversees fossil fuel production, but also oversees renewables and really has an eye out for both our energy security, our energy economy, and the future of energy here in Texas. And if that agency were going to be created and greater oversight of our total energy portfolio, perhaps it should be renamed the Texas Energy Commission.
Texas Energy Commission. I like it. A couple little quicker questions to lead us out here. What's been the hardest part about campaigning largely remotely during this pandemic? What have you found that the process has helped you with? And then what have been some of the shortcomings of it?
Well, the pandemic has obviously cut down, at least on the Democratic side, on any in-person gatherings, because we respect the social distancing and the need to wear masks. And frankly, people just don't want to expose themselves or others to the risk of getting COVID. So I campaign almost 100% virtually. It's remarkably efficient because I can talk to you over the internet and talk to people all around this huge state over the internet, sometimes as many as 3 or 4 or 5 Zoom meetings a day. But what we miss is the ability to really get to see each other in person, for you to see me and evaluate my sincerity, my advocacy, my enthusiasm for making a change here, which I really wish people could see in person, because I am pumped up about the fact that we can make a difference. When we all vote on November 3rd, we change the world. It's not going to be immediate, but we will change it.
Do you think attitudes towards climate change are changing in Texas?
I do think that attitudes are changing. You know, the National Petroleum Council it put out a report in December last year acknowledging that climate change is real and that oil and gas operations had an impact on climate gases. So that was novel. It was a turning point. And half the industry knows that the failure to get flaring and venting under control is an existential threat. So there's a reality that has come to bear here in Texas that we've got to do what we're doing better, or we risk losing all of the economic benefits of oil and gas, as well as the jobs and the companies that do it.
You mentioned earlier that you worked for a while as an engineer, and then you went back to law school to become an attorney. I'm wondering, what made you want to take such a significant step back in your career?
Well, I came out of engineering school in an epic downturn in the industry. I had my first job in the industry working as an intern for what is now Phillips 66 in Oklahoma, siting small pipeline installations and sizing pumps and the like. And when I graduated, it was 1985, and the industry was entering an epic downturn, not as big as the one right now, but it was still epic. And so I decided that I was probably going to have a more stable career if I went to work as a consultant for many of the companies instead of as an employee of one of them. So I went into software design, and I designed, I doubt anybody on this call remembers COBOL and mainframe computing, but that's the kind of software design I did. And I did that for oil and gas companies to help them account for and measure production and revenues in what was a really complex scenario. And then loved the problem solving aspect of it, hated writing lines of code, so I went back to law school and still been working on those problems ever since, which is what gives me my experience for this position.
I understand you are also a certified margarita enjoyer. My question for you is, what is the correct way to enjoy them, frozen or on the rocks?
Frozen sin sal is the way my husband and I prefer them. So that just means frozen with salt on the rim. Look, hey, a margarita can be good in many different fashions, whether it's on rocks, with salt, without salt, gold tequila, regular tequila. It's hard to make a bad margarita.
It's hard to make a bad margarita. Inspiring words from a candidate. Chrysta, again, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. And to our viewers and listeners, thank you all so much for joining us Full episodes of the briefing are available as podcasts on Apple Podcasts. This show may or may not be there. You'll have to tune in to find out. I will be live again here at 2:30 with Eliseo Santana, a candidate for Pinellas County Sheriff. And lastly, if you have not already, please follow Appeal News on Facebook and The Appeal on Twitter for more shows and updates like this one. I'm Jay Willis. Have a good afternoon.